Hello, everybody. Jambo, Mbote, bonjour. So this is just to welcome everyone and tell you how happy I am to be part of this panel discussion today and to raise the voices of women from the Great Lake region and, for my instance, raise the voices of women from the Congo in Central Africa. As we're going to talk about Africa, I just wanted to first explain to you that when we talk about Africa, we need to understand that it's a continent. And Africa is not an homogeneous place. It is a heterogeneous continent with celebrated diversity and similarity. And there's a myriad of culture, ethnic, tribal, and linguistic rich in human with different melanin level. Africa has contributed greatly to humanity with great civilization and legacy in terms of food, science, instrument. You know, Africa has never been discovered. It has always been there. So people are equal in Africa because there are loads of laws, and as we all know it, we are not only equal by law, but we are also equal physiologically, as we are all born and all die in the same process. But one of the key things that we see in Africa as elsewhere in Europe and in Asia, in America, is the social inequality, and particularly social inequality based on sex. So this is why I'm here today, to raise our voices, because sex identity is very much important for African women, and particularly for women in the Great Lake region. And as I told you, equality is based on this cycle. We are all born, we all go through this cycle of programmation of conception, birth, development, and death. This is what makes us equal. And we all know about this reproductive cycle of life. It's really static, it doesn't change. Human reproduction still depends on the sex identity at birth. So male and female gamete come together so that the reproduction of human can happen. And our equality is also being based now on the law. And if you see all the laws that are there since 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is a universal declaration, we've had several framework on equality, and most of them are always based on our sex as well. We are equal according to our sex. But when you look at some of the reservation, for instance, when you look at the Convention on the Elimination of all Forms of Discrimination, CEDAW, when you look at the country that make reservation, you can see that most of those countries always make reservation, and mostly with regard to the reproductive organ of women. They want to control how women, the birth and, you know, abortion, anything that does with the reproductive organ of women is always the key issue in most of the reservations that are made in terms of ratifying some of those legal framework. And you wonder why? Because men still want to control women and control our bodies, control us as if we were object. However, there's one thing that needs to be said here, is that there were past legal framework. When you look at the African civilization that's passed in the, we had the Ubuntu philosophy that's actually called on reference to equality, and the equality also according to sex. So this notion of women are inferior to men, and it's always been kind of something that's has stopped women from achieving their potential. We have instruments such as the Mandan Charter from the early kingdom of Mali in 1222, where also the reference to equality is there. So sometimes we ask ourselves why some of the African countries, for instance, Sudan, or maybe you know, Islamic country, makes those reservations, whereas their ancestor in the past clearly articulated sex equality. As we all know that the construct of gender according to society and all the roles and norms and tradition are really dynamic. So it really depends on the time, the environment, the context. So today, for instance, the way people are dressed and in Africa, or the way people, so it all changes. So there's always this discourse where when we are, for instance, in Africa, they tell us, oh, you're trying to wear clothes that are, you know, showing your bodies, and, you know, you want it to become like Western women. So, you know, why are you showing your body or your breasts? And we have to always ask the men. Sometimes 100 years ago, even 60 years ago, our foremothers, they didn't wear clothes. Some of them were naked. Why isn't it a problem? And why now you're saying that we are imitating? So it's always like men are trying to control women, regardless of, you know, whether you living in a different time. It's always been like they're trying to control how women are dressed, how they speak, what they need to do, and you know, all these stereotypes are based on patriarchy. And I'm not going to go into details because you all know about violent masculinity, and all this is being used to dehumanize women and objectify them in a sense. But one of the things that we hear a lot when we talk about Africa, we hear history, and the most of the story we hear from Africa are always very negative, and you know, with negative connotation from the media, and you know, we hear most of the time narrative coming from history are always like lost in translation and contextualized, you know, ignore, because what's happened is that Africa has been portrayed in a negative lighting everywhere, and we only hear the voices from the men. We only hear history, but we never hear from the women. Rarely you hear the story coming from women worldwide. And indeed, the history today is written by those who have won. Africa has been conquered by through slavery, colonization. So we hear mostly about patronizing history coming from Africa, from rich, white, male supremacists. And the story coming from African women is always canceled, rejected, and often erased. However, there's also a misconception about feminism, because many people think that feminism is just a Western narrative, whereas we know exactly that African women are also feminist, and the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial African women history has been left out. Hence, there are false connotations that tend to portray African women as lacking agency. And everything that is coming, for instance, if we say that African women are also feminists, they try to bring in a wrong connotation of feminists as being like African women advocating for women's superiority, or, you know, women taking men's place, not wanting to be mother, not wanting, so rejecting all these things that the stereotype that has been put with the gender stereotype that's, you know, how can I say, cements our culture and our tradition. However, I wanted to explain to say that there's been the feminism as a belief of social, political, and economic equality of women. There's been a lot of women who are has always been part of the feminism, has always been part of the African society. In much of ancient and pre-modern Africa, there possess economic, political, and spiritual power. To name just a few, we have the Dahomey women and the four women of the Western African civilization. We have the Wallo female warrior, politician women like KIMPA, VITA from Congo, and other women who are there, but their history are not taught in some of the history in the West, for instance. I'm not sure if many of you heard about KIMPA VITA, who she was a human rights and human rights defender and mobilizer and a politician. She was burned alive at the altar with her son for her resistance to slavery. So she was at that time already, that was in 1706, she resisted slavery. And as you see, when she was resisting, the men were also there. She had already a status. So we cannot go and say that the women at that time didn't have any agency, because they were there, they were resisting, and they were resisting with the men. you know. So one of the key things that I also wanted to highlight here is that most of the time when we hear about first wave feminism, second wave, third wave, we don't hear about the African women, because most of the time, sometimes it feels as if feminism is not an African ideology. It is an African ideology, and it is actually a human ideology. So most of the narrative about feminism found in textbook are determined by the dominant so-called international language, which often describe the conception of their story according to the context and ignoring reporting and from African and Black African women. So we are advocating for sex-based identity, and women in Africa have always advocated for sex-based identity and the respect of the right of women who wish to identify as women according to the sex that were assigned to them at birth as human rights, which have to be respected. So in several African countries, women represent the majority of population responsible for the daily governance. However, their participation in governance of Africa is still being denied, still because of this sex-based identity at birth, because they see women as weak because of their menstruation, because of the birth, when women give birth. So all this is still some of the key things that are stopping women from being part of the governance. So there is a lot of policy that has been imposed on Africa without women consent, without women being part of decision making. And so in Africa, we have women are fighting two fronts. We are fighting against domineering, patronizing patriarchy and violent masculinity. And on the other front, we are also fighting patronizing capitalist, racist and classist system of exploitation. And these are some of the key women, because most of the time when we hear about independence in Africa, we always hear the history of men. We hear independence fathers, but there were independence mothers too. They were there, and in all of sub-Saharan Africa and even in the north of Africa. But as today I'm speaking about the Great Lake region, which is a sub-Saharan Africa, I will try to give you some example. For instance, I'm still lucky to still have my grandmother. My grandmother is 95, who has actually told me about like the Bantu Women League. She's told me about some of the tragic death that women who fought for independence met in Congo. And we have a myriad of women who were fighting for the liberation of their country, and at the same time, the liberation of women like Miriam Makeba, Winnie Mandela, and we have women coming like Wangari Maathai, and now there's the new generation of Lima Bowie and Shimanda Ngozi. All these women are still identifying as feminist. So really, all I wanted to say is that African women are still fighting and to raise their voices and really to explain all the issues that they're facing. And I don't know if some of you have heard about the Great Lake region at the moment that has been engulfed in war. From this moment here, I will try to raise some of the voices of the African women in the Great Lake region, and there might be some sensitive pictures. So I really ask if some of you have children or are very sensitive, there will be some image that may, of this women's reproductive organ that you might find shocking. So since 1985, there's been, as you know, there have been a lot of movement in the Berlin on the Cold War that existed between the Russian and the USA. So there was a change of geopolitics. And at that time, they wanted to change also leadership in Africa. So the Great Lake region at that time was ruled by Mobutu, who was the president in the Congo. And because he was ailing, he was sick, they tried to replace him by somebody else, because Congo really, it's very strategic in minerals, such as coltan used in mobile phone, and diamond and cobalt that we use in electric car and you know, all these minerals that are used today with technology. So to enable some of the multinational to still continuing pillage of the Great Lake region of Africa, they tried to change the leadership from Congo to Rwanda. So there was this militarization of rebels who were going to topple the leader that were not, you know, serving the interests of the multinational and those sitting at the UN Security Council. So by arming some of those rebels, we had a genocide in Rwanda. And Marie-Lyse, who's here, will explain a little bit more about what happened. But what I can tell you is that the war that was fought in the Congo, and according to many reports and UN Security Council resolution, clearly demonstrated that the exploitation was the exploitation of natural resources was the main reason of the war. And there is, if you here in the media, you can hear that there was a lot of rape that has happened in the Great Lake region, particularly in Congo and in Rwanda and Burundi. But when you look at the curve analyzing how the mineral, you know, how the traffic of the illicit traffic of arms and mineral, there is a link between the war and the sexual violence. So mostly you can just hear, oh, there was rape in Congo, but they tend to not show the link really, because you will see clearly that when you can see the curve showing how those mineral was the illegal you know, exploitation of the increase of illegal exploitation of minerals and natural resources are really linked with the war and the sexual violence, the extreme sexual violence that we were seeing at that time. Women body were used as a battleground, and I'm really sorry to show you some of the picture. Congo today is called the capital of rape, but it should really be called the capital of rapists and of misogynists. And many of people might hear about Dr. Mukwege, who's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. They call him the man who repair women, you know, as if women were an object. Congolese women become like a car or a tool. So they call him the man who repair women, because a lot of women, when they were raped, they developed fistula, and some women even buried alive. Instruments were used, women, there was femicide. So it's still ongoing, even though the women have campaign, they try to change the law in that country. We now have a law on sexual violence, parity laws, but these women are still facing a threat. And even myself, as I'm speaking to you, I faced threat when I started in 2001, raising the voices of Congolese women here in the UK, at the UK Parliament. I faced threat from some of the Congolese men. So it's just to explain to you how sex identity is very much important to us as a human right base. So I will hand over now to Marie-Lyse, who will speak to you a bit about Rwanda.
All right, thank you, Marie-Claire, and hello, everyone. So my experience I'm going to share today is to show you the other side of the coins, the coin of what is happening in Rwanda. And I brought it together with Marie-Claire because some of you may have heard that Rwanda has invaded DRC and is still responsible of the plundering of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And women, me and Marie-Claire have come together to show an example what as women we can do in terms of challenging the status quo in the ground. So we've been working together with Marie-Claire since 2008, and we've campaigned across the UK, across Europe, went to America to just bring the voices of the grassroots. So Just to sum up the story, I won't go through the whole story of genocide in Rwanda. It will take another webinar. But in a nutshell, is that during the genocide of the Tutsis in 1994, women were also raped, and both camps, whether it's the rebels who are currently leading the Rwandan government, because many people may think like the current Rwandan government, it's a new government or anything, but they are the rebel who attacked the country in 1990s and they won. But women were used as a tool to kind of destroy the community. The analogy behind raping women is that the women are the heart of the community, they are the heart of home. So if a woman is raped, is destroying the identity of that particular community. It's very sad, it's shameful that women become a tool of challenging, or kind of a tool of showing domination over another community. Women should not suffer in that context, because we are human beings too, and we should be treated with respect and dignity. So the genocide led to the war that happened in the DRC, where over 1 million of people have died, as well as Marie-Lyse has explained. Women continue to be raped to kind of destabilize the Congolese community. So if we move on to the next slide. Coming back again to Rwanda. Rwanda today is portrayed as a country that has reached women empowerment, women inclusiveness. But at what price? Because what we see, it's a glass ceiling, or kind of like beautiful flowers being decorated. What is happening at the grassroots, it's a totally different story. So I'll tell you that a student from Newcastle University returned to Rwanda to interview female politicians about their lives, but not just for their public position, but also for their private lives with their husband and their children. And she found out that there was a rare exception to be in the public arena, but no matter how powerful they were in the public, the power didn't extend into their homes. One was told how her husband expected her to make sure that his shoes were polished, his water was put in the bathroom for him, his clothes were ironed, and the husband wanted not only his shoes laid out in the morning, but the socks were placed on the top of the shoes. All these things that made this parliamentarian woman who thinks she has achieved equality to continue to demean her and put her in her place. So women were still expected to perform even ceremonial duty, domestic duty. And this is a rare option to outsource such tasks. But some women feared violence from their husband if they didn't comply with these exceptions. And one of the women said that she felt so trapped that she contemplated suicide. And if we move to the next slide, I can tell you more about during the war, the picture that shows military. During the war, women also who dared to join in the military as well, they were also raped and used as a reward to keep the morale of the soldiers. Women who refused, they were tied with the pictures that you can see on the other side and were killed. But it doesn't end there, because even though we see that large numbers of women as parliamentarians, most women have also paid a price to speak against just being flowers decorated in parliament. Women like Madame Victoire Ingabire Numuhoza, and also Diane, as you can see at the bottom, Diane Rwigara, even to the extent that they showed nude pictures of Diane as a way of discrediting her, degrading her, to make sure that her voice is not portrayed. This should not be happening today in 21st century. But through the campaign and the hard work of women of Rwanda outside the country, because the ones in the country, they can't dare, they continue to campaign. And we managed the campaign that I joined way back in 2008 when I joined WILPF. And through WILPF and other international women organizations, we managed to raise the pride of these two women. And today, as I speak to you, they've been released from prison. But Victoire, at the top left, she also tried to set up a political party to be the voice of the people, but up to today, she has been denied because Rwanda, even though it has large numbers of women in parliament, does not recognize a woman, an independent woman with her own voice who can challenge the status quo that is led by the current single political party. So Victoire has written a book. You can find it on Amazon. And the book is called, I'll tell you what the book is called. Or I'll put it in the chat later. So she's written a book to explain her ordeal. So if we move to the next slide, the next slide will be now women reaching women. This is what we've been working on, me and Marie-Claire and many other women within WILPF from different countries of Africa, Sudan, Eritrea, Somalia. We've been joining forces and kind of sharing the suffering of the women in Africa and trying to change their lives through lobbying and advocating on their behalf. And that's how we've been able to successfully have Ms. Ingabire and Diana out of prison, and also many other women in Eritrea who are still fighting today, and Ethiopia today. The journey will continue. The journey will continue, and what we're sharing to you today is to show you that it is possible. If women reach other women, and if we put our efforts together, we can drive change. And we are an example, me and Marie-Claire, and the task ahead is still long, but coming on today with everyone here that I can see, if we carry on, our voices will never silenced. Next, Marie-Claire.
Yeah, so looking at the next slide here, oops. Yeah, I just tried to explain a little bit what we have come up with in terms of trying to engage with other women, not only here, but back home. As we know, there's a lot of refugee women here in the UK coming from conflict zone. And still, although they come here and understand a little bit about the laws and try to understand how this society works, but we see that there is always a lack of understanding of even of their own biology. So some women actually don't, because of the taboo that is associated with menstruation and the fact that a lot of women are actually seen as inferior because of the menstruation and because of the pregnancy or motherhood and all the gender stereotype. What we have done is basically we have this training where we try to promote the understanding of physiology of sex, the reproductive organ, and trying also to promote the legal framework so that women understand that not only we are equal physiologically as human beings in general, but also that the law protects women's rights. So we've noticed that a lot of women don't even know their reproductive organ. Some women actually the difference between the vulva, the vagina, the uterus, the fallopian tubes. So it's part of the training that we provide in terms of giving women confidence to understand what sex-based right is and the difference in the physiology that makes us just different. But regardless of that, we are still equal. So this is one of the training approach that we have, that we've implemented within the WILPF when we talk with our African sister, but also back home, because as you know, sex has become like a taboo. And when it's becoming a taboo, it doesn't give the woman the pride of her reproductive organ and to know how she's made, how is her vagina, how is her clitoris. So all this thing is part of this training that we give to women, and sometimes men also come to the training that we give. I spent a few months in Congo implementing this training, and I can see that there is a lot of critical change in the critical thinking. So we just want to thank you for having us, Marie-Lyse and I. We are available on Twitter